we sit back, relax, it's sober contracts.
A boundary is a limit you can set on what you will accept of someone's words or actions. A personal boundary is the same thing, but regarding our negative self-talk and unhealthy personal behaviors. The purpose of setting boundaries is to protect and take care of ourselves. We need to be able to tell ourselves and others when they are acting in a way that is hindering us. How do we develop unhealthy boundaries? Unhealthy boundaries are typically inherited during early childhood. The child's parents or caretakers may have been too negligent in a certain area, thus failing to teach them to say no in an unhealthy situation. On the other side of the spectrum, some caregivers can also be too strict and the child's boundaries could have been violated. In most cases, caregivers are unaware, but yet still send the message that it's normal social behavior to ignore someone's boundaries. One's ability to set and stick to a boundary is an essential part of preventing many traumatic experiences. Trauma is a precursor to addiction. The most common definition of addiction is continuing to use despite negative consequences. We traumatize ourselves eventually, and the cycle of addiction continues. We succumb to peer pressure or social stressors way more easily. We may even accept help from the wrong person, like an abusive or addicted partner. I sympathize with the dare cops and teachers alike over the years that thought telling me to just say no would work. No to that next shot because I was starting to feel sick. No to driving drunk. No to using instead of visiting my dying parents. By the time I started using, the ability to say no, which never really developed in the first place, was completely out of the equation. How to develop healthy boundaries. Developing healthy boundaries is a primary component of addiction recovery. First, we need to determine how our clients' unhealthy boundaries developed in the first place. We can then start to develop healthy boundaries, offering protection from future stressors and triggers to use. The next step is mindfulness of self and personal needs. Having needs and feelings are part of our whole being. By becoming aware and more understanding of our needs and stating them and any feelings we have out loud, we are affirming that we have the right to feel and to be. It is important that we learn to own ourselves. Remember, it's perfectly normal to feel angry. However, be mindful on how you communicate this message. You should say, I feel angry, not I am angry, because when you say it like this, you are becoming the emotion. It is also important to set consequences that we will be willing to enforce. To set boundaries and not enforce them gives the other person an excuse to continue in the same behavior. Setting boundaries helps us protect our space, physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, financial, and so on. We set them knowing that the other person may not be able to or willing to change their behavior, and that we are ready to take action if that proves to be the case. That action may even include cutting the person out of our life completely. Some people will try and say that your boundaries are a form of manipulation or control, but here's the difference. When we set a boundary, we shift focus from controlling outcomes to simply stating a genuine need that is being threatened or not being met. Manipulation in this case would also be violating someone else's boundary, which would indicate the motives are not in alignment with a genuine need. Is it possible to have a relationship with someone who has no boundaries? With someone who cannot communicate directly and honestly? Learning how to set boundaries is an important step in learning how to befriend ourselves. Ever since I was young, I had trouble setting boundaries because I was afraid of hurting people, being abandoned, or losing a relationship. I was worried that people would not like me or would go away. Eventually, I had to become willing to take that risk. I had to decide that I had enough self-worth to stand up for myself even if people did go away. And some people did go away, but to my amazement, I saw that some people I set boundaries with started to treat me with respect. I realized people did actually value me enough to respect my boundary and change their behavior. Remember, setting boundaries is not a threat. It is communicating clearly what the consequences will be if the other person continues to treat us in an unacceptable manner. It is a consequence of the other person's behavior. Remembering that we always have a say in the way we allow others to treat us is very important. We are powerless over many things, but we have the power over the way we are going to react to our boundaries not being respected. We addicts have been trained to be victims all our lives. We are taught to give our power away. Having this choice is the freedom we seek all along, and it starts with self-love and setting boundaries with yourself. What we are striving for is to have healthy, interdependent relationships. We want real friends, and in return, we want to know how to be a real friend. By setting boundaries, we are communicating with another person. We are telling them who we are and what we need. It is much more effective to do that directly and honestly than to expect them to read our minds and then punish them when they cannot. If we don't speak up and take the risk of sharing how we feel, we will end up aggressive or being passive-aggressive and in turn damage relations with ourselves and others even further. Examples of unhealthy boundaries: telling all or providing full disclosure when unwarranted, falling in love repeatedly with newer acquaintances, feeling overwhelmed by a person, sexual impulsivity, people-pleasing, accepting gifts you don't want or having trouble saying no, feeling angry or rejected when others say no to you, taking on others' problems as your own or taking them personally as your fault, difficulty asking for help. And here are some examples of healthy boundaries. Has a strong sense of personal identity, combined sense of self and situational awareness, staying aligned to personal needs, values, regardless of what others think. Ask permission to touch others or others' property. Ability to ask for help. Makes physical boundaries clear to others. Is able to negotiate and compromise. Is able to make mistakes without damage to self-esteem. Tolerates and accepts differences of opinion without altering their own.
I used to stick needles in my arm, and legally I can't own a firearm. I can't leave the state or vote for morons.